Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grim Scenarios. I'm your host, Milk, and with me is your other host, Emma. What's going on, Emma?
Not much. Just another day in the life.
That's right. We are back with another and a final installment of our tier list project. We are on the last of the Townsfolk. We do have a little bit of cleanup to do.
Yeah, I think there'll be one more after this probably to wrap up, to add some characters that have been released since we launched this, but we didn't go and cover with their character type. And maybe some other things, maybe a retrospective. And then we'll probably do some episodes with guests to get their thoughts on our tier list, but...
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty fun. Like, I think when we started this, and we could talk about this in the retrospective, but I do think, like, when we started this, it felt pretty daunting to me. It felt like, I genuinely felt like, I don't know how we're going to get through all this. And actually, it's gone really, really well, and our audience, you guys have all responded to it really well, so thank you all for all that. And yeah, we're just gonna keep kicking on. We got quite a lot today, because we're on the last of the experimentals, and some of these have dependencies in them, and so it's a big pile.
Yeah, so let's just kick things off. We left off with General last time, so we're going to open up with High Priestess, the next one alphabetically. The High Priestess character token is, each night, learn which player the storyteller believes you should talk to most. And I do think it's important with the High Priestess, to read the rest of its sort of Omnic's main text, which is, the High Priestess acts on intuition, and notably not information. It acts on intuition. The High Priestess can be shown the same player multiple times in a row, or a different player each night. This shown player can be alive or dead. The shown player can be good or evil. There are no official criteria that determine which player the storyteller must show. It is up to the storyteller's judgment as what do they think will most benefit the High Priestess and the good team in general. It could be because the player has important information that has not been revealed yet, or because the player is evil and a bluff that doesn't make sense, or because the player is trustworthy and needs to be trusted more, or because the player is good but on the wrong track and needs to be corrected, or something new. Milk, what are your thoughts on the High Priestess?
Well, I want to take a moment and shill for a really nice write-up that you did, which can be found in the podcast area of the server, and I think has been spread around the community quite a bit, talking about all of those different elements and aspects of High Priestess, and how storytellers and players maybe should think about what the High Priestess is and what the High Priestess can do. And so I think it bears reading that to think about what's at the core of High Priestess, which you sort of in short form is right there in the wiki. It doesn't have the things that we have in the past few episodes said, well, this is what makes something strategic, in the sense of it doesn't pick things, it doesn't necessarily have some push your luck. But I do think it's more strategic than it seems at first glance, because part of the strategy of High Priestess is figuring out, and again, you mentioned it's intuition based, but figuring out what all these pieces of the puzzle are that can help you to understand your information. And so the strategy is trying to build sort of together your social read of a player who you've been sent to, which players you've been sent to, in which order, what's happening in the Grim at those times. It's a character which is not necessarily making strategic choices, but has to have a broad strategic understanding of the situation to be useful. How about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, the High Priestess was originally conceived as a sort of social lubricant character to help, get people involved in the game, to get conversations happening that might not otherwise happen. The strategy in the High Priestess is the High Priestess wants you to actually go have a conversation with the person you're pointed at, right? It's not a character that you can sort of sit by passively with, and it's not a character that you can just jump into the conversation you have. The person you were pointed to saying, "Hey, I was showing you. Give me your role and information." That's not gonna get anything out of the High Priestess for you, or it shouldn't. I think if the High Priestess is being run well, as the Almanac makes clear, the High Priestess has numerous purposes it can be targeted at a player for. And one of your things is that you need to do is you need to say, okay, what is this person saying? What is this person saying? What was this person saying yesterday? What is the person saying in this conversation? What is the way that this conversation could help the good team by me having it? And it requires sort of, I think, very active play on the High Priestess's part to attempt to have these conversations and figure out what is to be gained from these conversations. And I think, for me, it's incredibly strategic for that reason. It's one of my favorite characters. Yeah, it's one of my favorite characters. It's a character that I think is pretty controversial. There's been, like Milk mentioned, I've done a very lengthy write-up on how I think the High Priestess ought to be run. And there's been some feedback that I've seen that's been incredibly negative on that, and I think some of it is because players don't want to engage with the game in the way that the High Priestess encourages it. I think one of the funniest ones was people were like, Emma has created a whole bunch of new reasons for the High Priestess to go somewhere. I was like, no, most of these are just taken straight from the Almanac, but instead of being one-liners, I've written up sort of the thought process that would go in behind why you would send a player to a person for the reasons the Almanac states. Like, there's nothing new here. It's nothing novel. So, and there's always a new player, and there's players who are uncomfortable with characters that sort of force you to go beyond the logic puzzle, and the High Priestess makes you go beyond the logic puzzle. And there's players who are uncomfortable with the logic puzzle, too. Like, and it's good that Clocktower has a balance of roles that point to and against different play styles and player strengths. It's one of the things that makes it a fun game. There's people who are better at being psychopaths than poisoners, and people who are better at being poisoners than psychopaths. Like, this is all good for the health of the game. But I'm just sort of, talking a bit about High Priestess generally. I think, the strategy is extremely high. Figuring out what is the gain for the good team out of this conversation, whether it's this player, and this can be very hard. It can be that you and this player you're pointed at are both good, and they have a better world than you have, and you need to listen to them. But it can also be you're both good, and you have a better world than they have, and they need to listen to you. And it's having that conversation, talking about why you've got into your worlds, what you're doing. You need to sort of think through, you don't need to know the why the storyteller sent you. You just need to go through the conversation and figure out, okay, we need to figure, it encourages you to have a conversation, and the conversation is the value of the character.
I think sorry, you go ahead.
It's not there to solve why you're sent to someone. It's there to punch through. It's there to force the conversation almost.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting it right on the head that it's so often that I send a High Priestess to someone, and then they go talk to that person, and they say, why was I sent to you? And the person goes, I don't know why you were sent to me. And that has almost completely eliminated, the point of sending the High Priestess to the person. They immediately get mired in, well, why was I sent to you? Rather than having a conversation, listening to one another, thinking about that interaction, and then coming to some kind of understanding about it. Right? They're trying to jump to why did the storyteller make this choice rather than what is this conversation about and how is it going to help me? And I think that's that's a misunderstanding of how High Priestess is meant to function. It like you said, it's a social lubricant. It's an incredibly strong social character, right? Because it crosses those lines. You got a player who's kind of disengaged with the game. Hey, send the High Priestess over there, and that player is going to be maybe drawn back in, and now you've got another good vote player who's helping solve, who's talking. That's a super powerful thing.
Yeah. I think it's a super highly strategic character. I want to put an S tier, but I'm willing to hear any arguments you might have differently.
I'm really glad that you said that, because I was going to suggest putting an S tier as well, and I don't think it brooks much argument, although I'm sure this is one that we'll get some pushback from our audience on, which is great because we love interacting with the audience. But genuinely, this is in many ways the social sort of the social version of philosopher, in the sense that the philosopher can sort of be anything. It can grab any role, and that means you can get any mechanical role you want. The High Priestess is doing in the social game sort of the get any information that's possible to give you by saying, hey, go talk, right? It's giving you these social interactions, and that's so powerful, and it's up to you to figure out why that social interaction is powerful, and then combine it with the logic puzzle of the game, or combine it with other information that you've gathered to get to the point of making it useful.
All right. Next up is the Huntsman. The Huntsman's ability is once per game at night, choose a living player. The damsel, if chosen, becomes a not-in-play townsfolk, plus the damsel. This is in many ways, controversial townsfolk because a lot of people think it's pretty weak, and it probably is.
Yeah.
The damsel is a really damaging outsider. The huntsman forces it into the game. A damsel who's doing their job well is going to be hard for a huntsman to identify, which means a lot of times the huntsman will shoot and miss, and then there'll just be a damsel there, and the huntsman won't have done anything except for added a damsel. And that's all true.
Yeah, that's all true.
That's all true. But I do ultimately think the Huntsman is a pretty strategically interesting character. The first part of the Huntsman's ability is the Huntsman knows there's a damsel in play, which is like underratedly important information for the good team, because one of the good team's jobs in damsel games is to try to cover for the damsel. If you think about it like this, like, on a script with the damsel and no, like, drunk or puzzle master, the evil team knows what information is true, more or less, right? Like, if you're a damsel bluffing empath 1, and there's 2 good players on your side, and the poisoner, knows they didn't poison you, like, they're gonna have a pretty good sense that you're probably the damsel, because you're giving information that they know, that the evil team knows you shouldn't be able to be getting. So one of the Huntsman's essential tasks is they know the good team is to sort of sound the alarm to the good team of, hey, we need to sort of do some damsel coverage here. We need to be a little cagier with our information, maybe get in some role swap our information around, slide in some strategic misinformation to get the evil team confused about where the damsel might be.
I think it's really important that maybe if we think about Huntsman in a slightly different way, right? I think if we think about the Huntsman's ability as being, there's a damsel in play, which is something you kind of hinted at in what you were saying, I think it opens up the Huntsman a whole lot strategically, right?
Yeah.
It allows the team it allows you to look like a medium well, like, hidden damsel. Like, you could just try not to, like, you can if you want, but, like, don't just go and say, I'm the damsel, ha ha ha, and, that's great. But, like, look like a medium badly bluffing townsfolk. Like look like you're a damsel that's kind of bluffing bad information poorly, or bluffing a role poorly. You're suddenly like a magician for just minions, in a sense. Like, you're suddenly kind of fishing for that minion to come out. Like, the strategy in Huntsman is, yes, partly in finding the damsel, yes, partly in maybe letting town know that they need to be covering for a damsel, and those are both interesting play patterns that the Huntsman has, right? Going, hey, there's a damsel in play, we all need to swap around our information, we all need to, try to trade roles. And also, you're just king, I know there's a damsel in play, let's see if I can get a minion to guess me.
Yeah. The Huntsman also has ways of sort of trying to make themselves known to the damsel, so the damsel can try to find them. Like, the most obvious one of these is top of day one, before anyone has the chance to talk to anyone, just make a damsel guess.
Yep.
Like, claim minion and say, I am claiming that I'm a minion and someone is the damsel. Doesn't really matter who. And, like, as soon as you do that, that leaves open 2 worlds for the damsel. One is, you are exactly the demon. 2, you are not a minion. Because it's... And even if you are a minion, you've just spent the damsel guess, and the damsel is safe talking to you, right?
Yep.
Like, those are the options there. There is no third option where, oh, what if this is a minion pulling a clever bluff?
Well,
like,
they might be, but it's not going to work out for them because they can't guess again.
Yeah, it's not. They might be pulling a clever bluff, but they're not a minion pulling a clever bluff in a way that's going to let them guess the damsel. And that's like a sort of extreme option for the Huntsman, but like, it's like there's ways you can make yourself trustworthy and not look like a minion pushing a Huntsman bluff too. There's ways you can think about this. All of which to say is, I am likewise to the High Priestess inclined to put the Huntsman in the S tier.
Yep. People are really gonna not like this one. But yeah, I think it goes in S tier very easily. There's a lot of great play patterns for Huntsman. The lack of imagination in the majority of people who pull the token is not responsible for the fact that you can do a lot with it.
Yeah. Next up are the 2 characters we're going to cover as a group. When we were going through alphabetically, we skipped the choir boy because we thought it only made sense to talk about the choir boy in context with its buddy, the king. So, the king. The king's ability is each night, if the dead equal or outnumber the living, you learn 1 alive character. The demon knows you are the king. The choir boy's ability is if the demon kills the king, you learn which player is the demon plus the king. I think these are both relatively low strategy characters. I'll just be upfront about that.
I think you're probably right.
The king is the good character who is most incentivized to play the game in exactly the way that the new player rule sheet that you're supposed to read out before you play a game, storytelling for new players, it does, which is most good players have incentives to be... Most good players will tell the truth about their role and their information. The king has essentially no incentive to lie. There's some unique scripts with like no dashies or vortoxes where the demon might not know who they are, where the king gets an incentive to lie. But for the most part, the demon knows who you are. There's very little reason for you to lie, and your protection against getting killed is coming from someone else. It's coming from the threat of the choir boy. So you really you're sort of solo tracking don't be executed by town, right? That's what the king is doing. They're solo tracking don't be executed by town. They really don't have another play pattern available to them. Again, absent that unique circumstance where there's a Vortox or a Nodashi who could be causing them to hide from the demon. Which, don't get me started on evil abilities that hurt evil.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty narrow idea anyway. And I think something that's worth saying here is, we were just talking about with Huntsman, where the Huntsman's, part of the Huntsman's responsibility is to get the town to help hide the damsel. Maybe part of the king's responsibility is to get the town to help hide the choir boy, but unlike the Huntsman, the king can't do it themselves. And I'm not sure how useful it is to hide a choir boy, because to do so almost requires the town to hide their information so much. Most of the time when there's a choir boy on script, you pretty much, as the demon, by day 2 or 3, have it narrowed down to a very small number of people. And there's really no reason not to just kill through those choir boy candidates before you kill the king anyway, or maybe even better, frame the king, get the king killed. there's not a whole lot the king can do other than sort of say that they're good and try to get to the point of information. Maybe on like there's some incentive for kings on like Leviathan scripts, like to really try to look very trusted. But again, that's a play pattern that we've talked about with Soldier and other things that I just don't think is very high on our tier list. And Choir Boy just wants to do the same thing as a lot of like Heidi townsfolk, right? Which is try not to get executed, hide what you are.
Yeah, the Choir Boy is, and a real, it's sort of forced to solo track. The don't get knight killed before the king is knight killed play pattern. Like, and if you're happen to be executed, you just don't want to admit you're the Choir Boy still, in hopes that the demon will still be scared of that, so that the king can turn on its information in the late game. King information in the late game is and should be super strong when it turns on.
Absolutely. It's hard to get.
It's just not. I think both characters are sort of one track.
I think also,
so for me, I want them down in D tier.
Yeah, me too. I think something I think is worth mentioning is each of the characters is one track, and you might once again say, "Oh, well, Huntsman and Damsel, they're kind of one track too." But Huntsman and Damsel actually benefit from finding one another, and Huntsman benefits much more than King does in a lot of ways from hiding the damsel, and getting others to hide the damsel, and the King can't engage in that part of it's really interesting in a lot of ways. I'm thinking about them now. They're very analog. Like Huntsman and Damsel and King and Choir Boy are kind of analogous in ways, and they're the two dependency pairs. But like Huntsman and Damsel is a more interesting dependency pair.
Yeah, and Huntsman has options. We just talked about how the Huntsman can, go for the super straightforward, I'm the Huntsman play. They can go for the buff is the damsel play. Like, they can go somewhere in between. Like, the Huntsman has options. The King and the Choir Boy really don't. Their characters are incredibly one track.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, maybe of the two, I can't even say which of them is really more strategic. They both have a single track, and they're things that other characters already do and are more interesting doing. So I'm going to pop them both into D tier.
Okay. Next up is the Knight. Milk, I've started the last few characters. What do you think about the Knight, whose ability is you start knowing two players that are not the demon?
It's a really interesting variation in the, confirmation start knowing kind of role. Start knowings are traditionally strong because they get information once at the beginning of the game, just like once per games are traditionally strong. Probably even more so because they have to, they have to push their luck element. Here we've got a character who, like other confirmation characters, benefits from keeping their pings alive. But boy, is the upside of that keeping their pings alive, like, the upside of that is really, really good. And the problem is the downside of that information coming out is really, really bad. And so I do think there's some strategy in the Knight in terms of how and when you reveal your information. How worth it is it to keep one of your pings off the block by revealing that, you're the Knight and that they're not the demon? It's pretty worth it to keep them off the block. But once you've revealed it, evil's gonna kill that player. So you have to find the balance. Having two pings, I do think, is beneficial to the Knight, because naturally you may just have attrition in your pings anyway, and so I do think there's some interesting strategy here that's pretty analogous to some of the other Washerwoman and some of the other you start knowing multi-ping characters. What about you?
Yeah. Like, I think, the Knight's in a weird spot. Like, I think, first of all, I just want to say, I don't like scripts where Knight pings can become the demon at a later point in the game. I try to avoid them. I try not to have Knight on my scripts where that can happen. I think it's not super fun or interesting for the Knight. I think, poison for the Knight is fine, but, Knight that, has sober information that gets outdated is pretty dull. So I just want to put that in mind. The Knight essentially then, like, similar to a washerwoman or librarian, the knight wants to protect their pings, but there is some chance for the knight that one of their pings is a minion. And preferably a minion who can't become the demon under any circumstances. So the knight's in a sort of weird place where they want to protect their pings, but not quite as much as a washerman and a librarian would like to. And also, there's not the two-way confirmation possibility with a knight. Like, the knight knows two people aren't the demon. Those two people have no way of knowing if the knight is the knight.
Yeah, it's a bit
it's
like...
It's what you call an easy bluff.
Yeah. It's a bit like Steward in that way, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, you're good. You're not the demon. Okay. Sure. Some of these start knowings and once per game, sometimes I think about them like in terms of, like, is this an artist question that I would ask? And I think it is. Like, it is, like, yeah. in terms of its value, like the information value, like, this is something I would ask as an artist question on S&V, like, pretty directly, So I do think, like, the knight's information is really good, and I do think they have to interact with their pings in a more unique and interesting way than some of the other you start knowings. So I think knight actually goes a little bit, at least with the other you start knowing, type townsfolk. If not, maybe just a slight step higher, but maybe like a half step higher.
Yeah, so we've mostly split our you starts knowing. We have some in A tier and some in B tier. And I'm fine to put the knight in either A tier with the librarian and washwoman, or in grandmother, or in B tier with the chef, clockmaker, or with the chef and clockmaker. I think it's really could go either way for me, so I'm happy to defer to you.
I think I want to put knight in A, and then we're going to talk about noble in a couple of characters. So maybe we revisit and look at knight and noble next to each other.
I think Steward, knight, and noble.
We have Steward still too.
Are three characters that, let's say, have thematic links in both their character names, their abilities that suggest they all will go on the same expansion together in the future.
Yeah, they do seem like they probably all go together.
All right. Next up is the Lycanthrope.
Oh, man.
And you heard my voice drop because the Lycanthrope is a character that, let's be clear, should not exist, should never have been released, and it's still an experimental character, so there's still time for TPI to do the right thing and delete it from the game.
Tell us how you really feel.
The Lycanthrope's so-called ability is each night choose an alive player. If good, they die and the demon doesn't kill tonight. One good player registers as evil. And somehow this is the fixed Lycanthrope. The old Lycanthrope's ability was each night choose an alive player. If good, they die and no one else can die tonight, and didn't have the drawback either. It was incredibly unfun and busted. And it turns out the new Lycanthrope is also incredibly unfun and busted. It's just an unfun and busted concept that has no redeeming features. So, Milk, what do you think about its strategy?
I have to divide out the groan that you just heard me make about Lycan at all from thinking about it and whether there is... I mean, there probably is some interesting strategic engagement here. Because it is interesting. Like, the picking game is interesting. Finding your faux pas, I don't know if that's even really possible most of the time, but it's interesting. Figuring out what happens when things you didn't pick, die in the night. I think if there's a good Lycanthrope script out there, it's probably Ekken's Lunar Eclipse script, which pairs Lycanthrope with some of the things that it really likes to be paired with, which make it weaker and more playable, which are things like Innkeeper and
Innkeeper, Mayor, Fool, Sailor,
yeah, all the things that
Lady.
can drunk it or mess with it in various ways, let it not kill for reasons other than hi, I'm the Lycanthrope hitting an evil. It doesn't make it fun, but at least it makes it a more interesting character, because then you have the puzzle of figuring out, okay, why didn't I kill? And it's not one of two reasons. So I think you can script build Lycanthrope into something that's at least interesting to engage with from a strategic layer.
I think Lycanthrope's always interesting from a strategic layer. It's like, who should I be killing that gives us the most information with the least risk, right?
Yeah.
That's the Lycanthrope's strategic thing, and it's a really interesting thing. It's like how demons are all high strategy. It's literally the good demon.
Yep.
Like, Lycanthrope's problem isn't that it lacks strategy. It's that evil teams cry in Lycanthrope games because, like, there's this super oppressive good townsfolk that's overpowered, way out of line with what townsfolk should be doing, and that, again, should never have been released and should be unreleased.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it also doesn't pair well with like there's a bunch of like things it doesn't pair with. Like, it doesn't pair well with a bunch of demon banes. Like, Lycan and Farmer together is a... Well, Lycan and Farmer's more okay because you can delete the Lycan, and that makes everybody happy. But, like, Lycan and Ravenkeeper, like, the Lycan just finds the Ravenkeeper and kills them.
Yeah, it prevents things from being bluffs. Yeah. It's just, like...
It's messy. It's really messy.
I was watching a game recently where Lycanthrope shouldn't have been in play because Lycanthrope's banned on the Twitch channel that was being used. But I was watching it, and, like, you know, the demon was given a Ravenkeeper bluff in a Lycanthrope game, and, like, they were like, I can't use this because the Lycanthrope will just try to kill me, and that'll suck. Because, yeah, I mean, but we're just viewing into why the character is unfun and stupid.
It's probably very strategic because you're trying to figure out what to kill and when to stop killing good players and when, you know, what good players are worth killing, what's a bluff, what's not a bluff. Like, there's a lot. There, you need all the info.
Super strategic, I think. I'm willing to put an A tier, and I could accept an argument for S tier on strategy, though.
Yeah, me too.
Just because it sucks and shouldn't exist doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of interesting strategy.
It sure does.
It just sucks and shouldn't exist.
I want to put it in A tier because it sucks and shouldn't exist, even though it probably is S tier strategically.
Yeah, we can toss it in A tier.
Yeah.
Fucking thing sucks and shouldn't exist, Milk.
Yeah, I know. It's bullshit. It's big bullshit. I do like Lunar Eclipse. I do like Lunar Eclipse. That's good. It's a good script.
All right, next up is the Magician. The Magician's ability is the demon thinks you are a minion. Minions think you are the demon. Milk, what do you think about the Magician?
It falls into a category of characters that I think of as disruptive. They disrupt the evil team from being able to communicate, or they disrupt the evil team from being able to do what they want. Those are the sort of layers of disruption characters. We'll get to another one of those here in a little while. Magician of the disruption characters, I think, is the one that is the most broadly used. I think it's the least bad feeling for evil most of the time because it is fairly solvable within a day or two. But it probably doesn't feel very good for the good player because the play pattern is try to trick an evil player into, or the predominant play pattern, I should say, is try to trick an evil player into outing evil to you and get them killed. That's sort of the predominant approach that magicians take. But, you know, maybe there's more you can do with it, treating it, passively, thinking about it being disruptive and maybe trying to look like a minion or look like a demon. You'd have to choose if you're going to try to look like a minion or look like a demon. Maybe getting into a role swap with a trusted good player. I think there's more you can do with it than just fish for evils, but I don't know how deep that strategy goes. I've done a lot of magicianing, and most of the time you end up kind of giving up on it by about day 3. You kind of start coming out as the magician, or you get killed, and you just say, "Oh, I was the magician." But I wonder if there's more that I haven't explored. Every time I pull the token, I wonder if there's more I haven't explored and more that I can do with it.
Yeah. I think the magician has a lot of different ways they can play. I've seen multiple games where magicians solo solve games, multiple games where magicians feel bad about solo solving games and try to find a way to turn evil so they don't have to do that.
I've done both of those.
I once played an in-person game I had the Boom Dandy token. And it's a magician game, and I'm talking with one of the other minions, and our two demons are in a very long conversation, and it's just not ending, and I'm just sitting there going, oh god, I know exactly what's happening here. Anyway, I get myself executed day one, and my demon's a leech. 4 players survive the explosion because my demon survives. And the dead magician immediately like, they're the leech, they told me they're the leech, this is their host, I fooled them, I was the magician, and I'm like, yep, saw that one coming.
Yep. Yeah, but there's a lot of ways that evil can try to find each other in a magician game. I think part of the problem with magician, from a discussion point, is magician as a disruption character forces other players to play in a different way, and forces evil to employ some other strategies to find each other. So I think the response to magician is highly strategic. Like how you have to engage with magician as a token is highly strategic. I don't know how much choice there is for the person with the token, but I do think there's a lot of strategy around it.
I think there's a fair amount of choice. Do you want to try to look like a demon to catch the minions out? Do you want to try to look like a minion to catch the demon out?
Do you want to just sort of look hidden for a while and see if you can get that disruption to build into the mid game?
Yeah.
I do think it's strategic.
Seen magicians play it being like, "I'm not the one you're looking for," publicly. Is what magicians say.
That's good. I like that.
I think there's a decent amount of strategy for the magician. I don't think it's super high strategy. I don't think it's super low strategy. I'd be willing to put it in B tier.
I think I was inclined to put it in B tier as well. I do think it's interesting, and I always imagine that there's more to do with it when I've got the token. Well,
all right. Only 8 more townsfolk to go, Milk.
This one's going to run a little long, I think, Emma.
Next up is the Night Watchman. The Night Watchman's ability is once per game at night. Choose a player. They learn you are the Night Watchman. This can be any player. You can even choose yourself.
Famously. Well, this one's your specialist character. I think this one's your specialty, Emma. So I'll defer to you to take the first crack at a Night Watchman.
Alright, so most of the time, Night Watchman, you want to go pretty early. You want to send your ping to someone. They're probably going to confirm it in most circumstances. Maybe sometimes evil players will decide they don't want to confirm it, but that's a big risk for them. Yeah. There's not much more to it. There's some interesting and weird things you can do in certain situations. With Zon, you can try to use it to find the Zon Knight or break or presume it's not a Zon Knight. With Vortox, you can pick yourself to learn if it's a Vortox game or not.
Hilariously.
I've done that.
It's quite good for pit hags to make a evil Night Watchman as well.
Yeah, but then when pit hag scripts, one of the problems if the Night Watchman waits a night, they look super like the pit hag turned another minion into the Night Watchman for a night.
Sure do.
It's pretty straightforward, I think. I think, other than niche cases, the Night Watchman is pretty one-track.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And it's probably going into C tier here. It's, there's some stuff you can do, but it's not much. But pay attention and see if that Vortox is on script, because you can pull an Emma.
Next up is the Noble. The Noble's ability is you start knowing 3 players, one and only one of which is evil.
Well, here we are back to our starts knowing some information characters. And like the Knight, here's 3 players that you might just want to get all the way to Final 3. But one of the things about starts knowing roles, and certainly there's lots of different ways to play them, and part of doing this tier list is talking about varying strategies you can use for characters. Part of starts knowing roles is it's the information that you can act off of as a town early in the game, and I think a lot of times, whereas knight really can't give out their information, I think nobles are strangely hesitant to share their information. I can understand, two of those players are always going to be good, and so you don't necessarily want to, chainsaw through what are likely pretty powerful townsfolk that the storyteller has marked with noble pings. Simultaneously, however, you do need to, you do have an evil in there somewhere, and so you do need to try to dig into them. The strategy comes in how you share out your information, when you share out your information, what you choose to do with that information, who you choose to connect it with, how you corroborate it, and I think that's an at least interesting puzzle.
And I do think I'll stand up for the sort of secret noble ping strategy, because it's one I use quite a lot. And the sort of theory behind this is there is no game of Clocktower where you as the noble have time to execute through all three of your pings and get yourself killed to guarantee an evil dead, right? That's 4 executions. In most games of Clocktower, there's better things to do with 4 executions, right?
Agreed. It's also only going to kill 1 evil with those 4 executions.
Yeah, it's 4 executions to get 1 evil, and there's better things to do. However, if no one knows your noble pings and 2 of them die at night, suddenly you have a pretty good, damn good execution that you can use on the 3rd one, who's almost certainly evil.
And I often see that work.
Yeah, I found a leech that way once.
Yeah,
on day 2, one of my noble pings got executed despite me not wanting it. And then the other one was killed at night, and the 3rd one was the leech. And I was like, well, it's day 2, and 2 of my 3 noble pings are dead, so let's go check out this 3rd one. And we executed them, and they refused to die because they were the leech.
So, here's my slightly varied approach to this, because I do think it's important to think about what happens when you out your information. Because my approach to noble is I quite like to talk to the pings, and if I find one that I think is more socially trustworthy, I might out that ping. Because a person who's in a noble ping, if it's not going to get them, if it doesn't seem like it's obviously going to get them killed, because a person who's in a noble ping is less likely to get killed by the demon. And so if you can get that information to the demon, and that player is good, the demon may leave them alive, and you may benefit from, again, that ability that the storyteller was trying to get you to chainsaw through. You may benefit from it for longer. So I think those 2 approaches being just pretty substantially different suggest that the noble does have some interesting play patterns and does have a bit of strategy in thinking about what to do with these 3 names.
Yeah. I think of all starts knowing characters, in my mind, the noble is the one that has the most interesting strategic considerations, because it's neither an investigator nor a washerwoman. It's somewhere in between these 2, and that's really interesting. Because how you deal with both wanting to protect your good pings and get your evil ping killed is super curious. And I think it encourages lots of creative play pattern. And I realized I've been very far away from my computer mic when I was saying that, so it might be a little quiet in the edit.
That'll be all right. I'll go through and use AI to fix it or something.
But yeah, I think Noble is our S tier starts knowing.
I agree with you 100%. Noble is the S tier starts knowing. It has a lot of different approaches, and that information is the most interesting of the starts knowing information, which I think is why Noble makes it onto quite a lot of scripts. One other thing is, I think that makes me more inclined to leave Knight where it is, as opposed to moving it down to B tier. I think when we get to Steward, we may have one to slot in a little lower.
All right, 6 characters left, 6 townsfolk left. The first of them is the Pixie. The Pixie's ability is you start knowing one in-play townsfolk. If you were mad that you were this character, you gain their ability when they die. What do you think, Milk?
There's two play patterns that strike me pretty quickly. One is just claim the thing that you're mad as and act as an insurance policy and wait until the other person dies and hope that they die first and that you get the ability. And the second is out as the Pixie and confirm the role being in play. But I do think there's some other interesting considerations because if you're a Pixie of a fairly powerful role, it's likely that role is going to be hiding, and you might be able to just, instead of being the insurance policy and catching the ability, you might be able to get yourself executed, or you might be able to not get yourself executed. You might be able to get yourself killed by the demon. There's some other things. I think there's some other things you can do with it beyond just get roll, claim roll.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's basically correct. I do think most of the time that's what you're going to do. I think most of the time that's fun. There are characters where I think it makes more sense to not claim the role, just say, hey, I'm Pixie confirming someone. I don't know.
Share the info to your trusted circle of good guys,
Yeah. One of the things I think that does make it strategically interesting is if you're going to do the get roll, claim roll, then you have to start crafting fake information, right? Mm-hmm. And how you craft fake information is, I do think, a pretty strategically deep thing. You don't want your fake fortune teller pings to get good players killed and protect the demon, right?
Correct.
You don't want your fake washerwoman pings to make you look like you need to be executed or that you might be drunk. So sort of like figuring out so I think the strategy of crafting fake information that helps the good team, and also realizing, hey, my information isn't helping the good team, maybe it's time for me to come out as the Pixie, are all super important things.
I think those are all interesting. Play patterns as well. And
all of which is to say, I want to put the Pixie in A tier.
I want to put it in A tier as well. And I think there's also, when you have poisoning roles on the script, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to at some point maybe consider, if you think you're poisoned, start pushing on that other person who has your role. They might be bad guy.
That's always true, though.
That's true.
All right, next up is the Poppy Grower. The Poppy Grower's ability is minions and demons do not know each other. If you die, they learn who each other are that night. This character is very similar to the Magician, right? In some ways, it's a little bit tiered up Magician. In some ways, it's theoretically a tiered down Magician. In the sense that the Magician effect never ends, but it never ends on paper, but does end in practice a lot of the times. Yeah. Whereas the Poppy Grower effect has a terminal point.
It definitely has the I know that they know, situation. Like, it has the I know that the evil team is disrupted. I know that they don't know who each other are component. And that means you can fish for evil players. That means you can look at like people voting and how they're interacting with each other. You could get a feel usually that a game is a Poppy Grower game if you're not the Poppy Grower, and that can help the Poppy Grower generate some trust in the mid game and potentially be able to reveal that they exist. But most of the time, you're gonna just be hiding your role and trying to either disrupt the evil team for as long as possible, or try to get the evil team to out to you. I think those are kind of the two predominant play patterns.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I think there's nothing really more to say about it than we didn't say about Magician. You don't have the benefit in terms of tricking evils that they've been told you might be one of them. But on the other hand, they're more desperate and have less friends. So
I think it's maybe B tier with the magician, but maybe even a step down into C tier because it benefits so much from the predominant play pattern of just trying to hide and claiming an outsider or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put it in B tier, but if you want to put it in C tier, I'm not opposed.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to find gradients where there aren't any. I think we can just put it in B tier. It's very much like magician. It's mostly the same flavor.
Okay, next up is the Preacher. The Preacher's ability is: each night choose a player. A minion, if chosen, learns this. All chosen minions have no ability.
I think crucially, the minion learns that they've been chosen, not who the Preacher is, which was a mistake I made early on. I think the first time I pulled Preacher, I thought it was like Exorcist that the minions learned who the Preacher was. They don't. The minions just learn that they have been preached. And it's another disruption character, like the Magician and the Poppy Grower to an extent, because it prevents evil from doing what they want to do.
Yeah. A big thing a Preacher can figure out is sort of learn by missing, right? If there's loud minions and they're not going away, it means you haven't hit them yet.
Yeah, I think Preacher benefits heavily from there being loud minions on the script. I think, the kind of passive minions, the quiet minions, things like Baron and Mastermind and Marionette. There's some of these abilities that don't pair well with Preacher, but on the other hand, it quite likes to hit things like Psychopaths and Poisoner. Well, Poisoner not so much because it won't know it's in play. Psychopaths and Ceranovises and Fearmongers. It pairs well with those in the sense that it can shut them down and sort of know that it's done it. You're talking about that sort of reductive approach where you kind of pick people, and if the ability still goes, then
they're not. At least they don't have that ability.
They're not that minion. Yeah.
Or that evil.
Yeah.
They might still be a minion, they might still be evil, but they're not the one generating the loud ability. You've learned something important.
Preacher is pick someone, see what happens, try to get social reads, pick people who are, pick different people each night, pick people who you think are more likely to be evil, pick people who you think might survive because you'll get more mileage out of your ability if people are alive longer. If it's somebody you think might die in the night, maybe don't pick them because probably not going to get that much out of it.
Yeah. Seems to me like this is probably somewhere between the B and A range.
Yeah, I think it's probably another B tier. Again, I think all these disruptors, they're sort of very situational, and I think it aligns with them nicely in the B tier. So I think I'm good to put it there.
Next up is the Shugenja. The Shugenja's ability is you start knowing if your closest evil player is clockwise or anti-clockwise. If equitism, this info is arbitrary. And sorry for that pause there. As an American, I get annoyed by anti-clockwise. We use counterclockwise here in the States.
Counterclockwise. Do you want to take this one?
Sure. It's like, we have Chef and Clockmaker in B tier. I think Shugenja is also in B tier. They're all very all these positional information rules are very similar in that they're extremely powerful. And you're normally just benefited by sharing that information.
Yeah, there's not a huge... Yeah.
Yeah. There's some situations where it might make sense to hide it, namely against stuff like Poppy Grower and Magician, where sharing your information might reveal things to the evil team. But in most cases, you just want to tell people this. It helps the good team more than the evil team. Most of the time, the evil team will already know which direction from you is an evil player. First, clockwise or counterclockwise.
Might tell an evil team where a recluse is in a very sort of occasional situations or something like that.
Yeah.
I think of the ones you mentioned, I will say I think Shugenja might be the least strategic of them because I think it's the character that genuinely benefits the most from going, "Hey guys, I'm the Shugenja. They're that way." It has really the least reason to hide because even if you know that they're that way as an evil player, even
you know what? You've convinced me. Let's put it lower than Chef and Clockmaker. Let's drop it down to C tier.
C tier Shugenja. I'm throwing it in there. I won one.
All right.
But that's all there is to say.
Second to last, Townsfolk. The Steward. Great flavor text, by the way. How dare you accuse her ladyship of wrongdoing? I've known her my entire life, all 9 years. The Steward starts knowing one good player.
Yep.
It's pure one-way confirmation, incredibly easy to bluff for an evil player. Yeah.
It's the B tierest of the ones we're talking about today of the you start knowings.
Yeah, much like a Watchman and a Librarian wants to keep the ping they're protecting, confirming alive, the Steward really wants to keep their ping alive. But the Steward should be even more willing to die for the benefit of their ping than the Washerwoman or the Librarian, because the Watchman and the Librarian are somewhat confirmed in themselves. Their true goal should be that neither them nor their ping should die. Whereas the Steward has not in any way confirmed, and if you can die to protect your ping, you should.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I mean, like, you want to look socially good because it's so easy to bluff. Like, you don't want to mess around too much with it. I think it's probably B tier.
I think it's B tier. I would almost drop it down into C tier, but there is more to do with it than there is to do with Shugenja and Night Watchman. So I'm gonna, at least from what I'm looking at, because I only have this chunk of the tier list.
Yeah, so this puts it below Washwoman and Librarian with Chef and Clockmaker.
I think that's where it goes.
Yeah. Okay. And the very last of them, the last townsfolk in Blood on the Clocktower, alphabetically.
Ever.
The famed village idiot, whose ability is each night choose a player, you learn their alignment, which if it stopped there would be the most powerful townsfolk in Clocktower, I think. Square brackets, +0 to +2 village idiots, one of the extras is drunk. And that bracket is the sort of self-balancing mechanism of Village Idiot, which is it's really easy for evil to bluff because there can be more than one of them, and sometimes you're drunk.
But it's also the thing that I think gives Village Idiot most of its strategic interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because on its own, pick people and find out if they're good or evil. Like, if that's all the ability is, it's just a really powerful, low strategy ability. Pick people, find out if they're evil. Pick people you think are evil, and find out if they're actually good. Like, that's the whole thing. But because you have to have a social interaction with other players, some of which are potentially evil, trying to fake being village idiots, you have to talk to the other village idiots to figure out if your information is the information that's right. And that's super interesting because you're not a one-player strategic team anymore. Now you're a 2/3/4, the normal number of village idiots team of people trying to figure out the information. And I think that's what makes Village Idiot interesting and strategic.
Yeah. I agree with all that. Like, what makes the Village Idiot interesting is the possibility that you have evils hiding among you, the possibility of a clever, well-done drunking in there. And that's really interesting stuff. I think Village Idiots, more than other characters, need to talk to each other quite a lot. And I found in my experience they don't. Like, the Village Idiots gain a lot if they meet up with each other, they compare notes, they choose who they're picking together to try to see what the storyteller will give them. Because the storyteller doesn't want to let the Village Idiots solve who's drunk easily. So if, like, there's 3 Village Idiots and they all pick the same player, like, it's harder for the storyteller to give false information to the drunk one because they want to save it for later when the Village Idiots aren't coordinated. So I think, like, the Village Idiots have a lot of interesting things they can do. they can also try to, like, go off and do it by themselves, which is, I think... Yeah. I think it's pretty strategic.
I think it does go in A or S tier. I'm not sure which, to be honest, but I think from my perspective, because of what I think is important in the game, what I would say is any character that encourages you to engage in the strategy of your token ability with other people is going to tend for me to go up into S tier. Anything that the strategy of your ability is pushing you towards social interaction, I think I'm going to push it up a little bit.
All right, but here, let me make a counter argument, Milk.
Yeah.
And it's just a counter argument. Right now, in S tier, we have 4 minions, 4 outsiders, 4 demons, and 13 townsfolk. If we put the village idiot in A tier, our S tier will be the perfect amount of characters for a script. If we put the village idiot token in S tier, we'll then have to figure out one townsfolk to remove from the S tier script.
Well, rest in peace, village idiot. I mean, rest in A tier. You did your job. You did your job well.
I do think, looking at what we have in S tier, monk, raven keeper, snake charmer, philosopher, artist, innkeeper, gambler, gossip, acrobat, fisherman, high priestess, huntsman, noble, village idiot is, I think, the one that I'd probably argue to drop anyway.
It would be village idiot or it would be acrobat, depending on what else is on the script. And I don't see the full script. I don't see the full lists right now.
The full script. The full script is summoner, goblin, baron, poisoner, butler, damsel, lunatic, mutant, alhadikia, imp, vortox, poe, monk, ravenkeeper, snake charmer, philosopher, artist, innkeeper, gambler, gossip, acrobat, fisherman, high priestess, huntsman, noble. I'm not saying it's a good script, but it is a script.
It is not a good script. Yeah, all right. Let's leave village idiot in A tier. Because I do think it's not as strategic as most of those other characters that we've put in S tier.
Yeah.
From a balance.
And its core, Village Idiot, is pick a player, learn their alignment, which is not very strategic whatsoever.
Yeah. And if you're the only Village Idiot in a game, then
there's basically no
strategy. Yep.
Especially if the evil team isn't claiming it.
Bluffing it, yeah. Yeah, I played in a game in person recently, where there was just a village idiot, and there was only one in the bag, and the evil team wasn't bluffing village idiot, and the village idiot just went down the line going, "You're a bad guy, you're a bad guy, you're a bad guy." Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Bluff village idiot when you're a minion.
Yeah, it's worth
Let
it.
the demon use their bluffs. They're not for you anyway. They're for the demon.
Yeah. Get yourself killed, minions. That's what you're for.
All right. We'll probably be back next week to do our retrospective look at the entire tier list and slot in the few things that we haven't gotten around to yet.
We owe Zon and Wizard, I think.
Zon and Wizard, definitely. There might be one other, but...
Yeah, we caught Boffin. There might be...
We did catch Boffin.
What was the November...
It was Gnome, which we didn't end up doing.
We didn't end up doing Travelers, so that's fine. I'm not sure. The more I've thought about it, like, the less I think there's much value in talking about Travelers in a tier list perspective. They're all very strong, and yes, some of them have more strategic choice than others, but I'm pretty sure that our listeners can intuit which are which.
Yeah.
You don't need our opinion on it.
All right, then. So, with that, I think it's time we're going to sign off. And I just want you all... We're going to sign off, and we're just going to take this moment and close your eyes and focus for a second and think about your breath. Focus on your breath. Breathe in. And breathe out. May your scenarios stay grim.